Okay, so I'm just
So I
ready
can
to go.
see.
Talk, everyone will hear. Good to go. Okay. Can everybody hear me all right?
Yes,
Yes?
I hear you.
Okay, so first of all, I want to start by thanking all 176 of you so far for making the time to come and participate in this, what I would say is, I think, a very, very important event. We are fortunate to have a panel of very highly qualified people with a range of wisdom and experience and insight coming from a number of different angles to share with us about the topic of psychedelics, using psychedelics, or things to consider in deciding or considering about using psychedelics for treatment of mental health issues. Obviously, it's something that, you know, it's all the rage. There's a lot of research that's moving very quickly about it. And as something that seems like it might have the potential to help people, as something that people know about, people are interested in, we are here, and I'm, you know, again, fortunate to have the privilege of being with this board of people to come and share insight, share wisdom coming from a number of different angles, from a clinical perspective, from a perspective, a Jewish perspective, a Chassidish perspective, etc. So I'm going to give also just a note to everyone there. Among all of you, we have obviously a spectrum of people with a wide variety, obviously, of levels of knowledge and experience. Different people, for some people, some of you will probably have very minimal background knowledge and understanding of psychedelics. Some of you probably a lot more. So myself and all the panelists are going to make an effort to present things in a way that it'll be clear to everybody. Hopefully there'll be things that are new and insightful and interesting to everybody. So the panel tonight we're going to starting with Tzvi Freeman, a senior editor at Chabad.org, author of a number of very, very popular books. I see here some new guys that I wasn't aware of. Tzvi has a history.
Read them.
A number of years ago, I'm about to. Born in Vancouver, Canada, where he became involved at an early age in yoga, Tao, and radical politics. In 1970, he was a founding member of Total Education Alternative High School. 1975, left a career as a classical guitarist and composer to study Talmud and Jewish mysticism, and made his way all the way up to being senior editor of Chabad.org. I'm sure many, if not all of you, are familiar with his name and face, and it's a privilege and an honor. We are also going to be hearing from Mrs. Divi, a psychiatric nurse practitioner, Yale-trained psychiatric nurse practitioner, also an IFS practitioner, and with many years of experience treating a range of mental health issues with a primary focus on eating disorders. And as a practicing nurse practitioner, specifically in psychiatrics, Divi is obviously going to have a lot of valuable experience and insight into the medical and clinical view in terms of using psychedelics to treat mental health issues. We are then going to be hearing from Rabbi Joey Rosenfeld, and I have a confession to make, Rabbi Rosenfeld. I'm a very long-time lurking fan of yours on Facebook and other places. You may not have heard much from me, but I've been hearing a lot from you, and it's I very much enjoy hearing from you. Rabbi Rosenfeld, Joey Rosenfeld, is a practicing psychotherapist, specializing in addiction, with almost a decade, I believe, of experience as the spiritual programming director at Harris House Treatment and Recovery Center. So with many, many years of experience treating addiction, treating people with probably a range of mental health comorbidities, and specifically with that emphasis on spiritual programming. And Rabbi Rosenfeld's approach generally is with a focus on the interface between philosophy, spirituality, and psychology. And I'm looking forward to hearing a bit more about the extent to which they're all perhaps almost one and the same, just different parts of the same thing. we have Rabbi Ofer Kripor, from whom we're going to be hearing also. Rabbi Ofer Kripor is a shliach in Peru, perhaps the international epicenter of the use of ayahuasca. So Rabbi Kripor obviously sees many, many people traveling from around the world to come to Peru to dabble, experiment, use ayahuasca, has personal relationships with a number of shamans. So we're going to be going through hearing, we're going to be giving, everybody's going to have 10, 15 minutes to share what they have to say, share their angle and insights on things to consider in terms of using psychedelics to treat mental health issues. And then we will, at the end of that, have a substantial amount of time with which we will be addressing questions. And with that, I am going to invite Tzvi Freeman to come and share his wisdom and insight.
I'm on. Okay, so it's not my wisdom insight to start with. I wanted to start with a letter on the Rebbe that addresses LSD that was penned in 1965. But before I do that, so usually we're presented, this is what the Rebbe said, and it's like derech pekuda, you just dogma, that's what you have to accept. I don't think that the Rebbe really wants to be heard that way, especially in a case like this, where what you're going to do is what you're going to do. You have to have some sort of hergish, you have to have an understanding of what's going on. And of course, the Rebbe's letters, especially letters in English, the Rebbe didn't write them themselves, it was written through another voice. Dr. Mendel had a very different voice in his writing than the Rebbe, but in this case, we have the edits from the Rebbe in there. So when we're hearing from the Rebbe, the Rebbe's writing a letter, he cares about this person. And he's not going to tell him, do this, don't do this. He's giving him some hasbara, some explanation. And besides the Rebbe's opinion, we want to know, and we need to know the explanation as well. So let me share that letter on the screen here, if I can. Share screen. Always have trouble with this. Share screen. Here it is. No, that's the wrong. I know you're seeing the Kuntra Veda one. Stop sharing that and get the other one. We try again. And this is a letter about LSD. Please pull that one up. Okay, so you see the letter about LSD right now, right? I hope everybody's seeing that. Yisroel, give me some feedback. Is everybody seeing what I'm seeing?
I'm seeing it.
Okay, good.
Let us know, everybody, in the comments, if you can see the letter up on the screen.
I guess if you see it, everybody sees it.
Yeah,
so
I'm seeing it.
It's a letter, like I said, you can't see the date here. It's 1965. So by 1965, LSD had not yet been illegalized. As was, I think, 1966, it was California, Nevada, and so on started illegalizing it. But it certainly had a stigma to it in much of society. It was being played as there were psychologists who wanted to use it for therapeutic purposes, and much of society was really against that. And eventually, the Johnson administration, mostly CIA and FBI, really clamped down on it, and it was really stigmatized. So this is before it's illegalized, but still it's a bit stigmatized. Greetings and blessings. I am in receipt of your letter, October 18th, which you write in the name of your friends and in your own behalf, and ask my opinion regarding the new drug called LSD. It wasn't exactly new, but it was, I think, from 1930s, but it was new in its use since the 60s, or late 50s, I guess, which is said to have the property of mental stimulation, etc. So we're not talking here about a person who's asking for use under a therapist for his comorbidities, whatever you call them. He wants mental stimulation, which probably means he wanted a psychedelic experience. Biochemistry is not my field, and I cannot express an opinion on the drug you mentioned, especially as it is still new. However, I can say What I can say is that the claim that the said drug can stimulate mystical insight, etc., is not the proper way to attain mystical inspiration, even if it had such a property. So the Rebbe is not denying it could, if it had such a property. The Jewish way is to go from strength to strength, not by means of drugs and other artificial stimulants, which have a place only if they are necessary for the physical health, in accordance with the mitzvah to take care of one's health. I hope that everyone will agree that before any drugs are taken, one should first utilize all one's natural capacities, and then when this is done truly and fully, and the next part should read, it seems, I do, how do you say it? I am sure that there will be, that when it's done truly and fully, I am sure there will be no need. That seems, I talked to several people who are mevinim in the Rebbe's notes over there, but they think that's what the Maskiros were supposed to understand. That it's supposed to read, I'm sure that there will be no need to look for artificial stimulants. And you'll notice here, the Rebbe writes in, and it seems to be related to what the Rebbe wrote truly and fully, Lo yagati umatsasi al tamin. V'lo yagati. If somebody says, I didn't try, and I got there, that's, you don't believe them. I trust you and your group, in view of your yeshiva background, have regular appointed times for the study of Torah and the inner aspects of the Torah, namely the teachings of Chassidus. And that study is in accordance with the principle of our sages, namely the Maisu Eker, which means the actual conduct of a daily life in accordance with the Torah and mitzvahs, prayer, tefillin, kashrus, etc., etc. This is only a matter of will and determination, for nothing stands in the way of the will. And davar emid b'fnei harotzon. I trust that you're also using your good influence throughout your environment. It was signed by the Maskiros. So what's key for me over here, besides the fact that the Rebbe doesn't say, no, this is stupid, don't do this, and so on, the Rebbe gives us bara. And what's very key to me is those words that the Rebbe added in. Lo yagati umatsasi al tamin. What would you think the Rebbe wrote? I'm going to stop sharing now and you get to see my pretty face again. Stop sharing. So you would think that the Rebbe would write there, if you're going to try truly and fully, yagatu matzasi tamin. And when a person tries, he gets there. That's what you would think. Yagatu matzasi. You try fully, yagatu matzasi. The Rebbe doesn't write that. He writes, lo yagati umatzasi, al tamin, which means to say, I mean, once you said yagati umatzasi, why do you have to say lo yagati umatzasi al tamin? That's to tell you that the way the world is designed is that you can't get anything true or real, which is what Torah is all about, without your own investment, without your own work. So that seems to be key. That sums up the whole thing. So I've only got a few minutes, so I'll tell you a story. And this is in Vancouver in the early 70s, which was really a hub for psychedelics and drugs, because all the American draft dodgers were there, and the Vietnam War, and all sorts of communes and so on. It was a wild place. And the hub of the whole thing in Vancouver was in Gastown. There was the Gastown guru. He lived above a storefront somewhere, an elderly man from India. And my mother heard about him, and she used to have all these people over, all sorts of very interesting people over to the house and different talks. She said, I'm gonna invite the Gastown guru to come over. We'll pick him up, bring him here, and invite people to come and see what the Gastown guru has to say. So we had a nice crowd of interesting people, and the Gastown guru was a little man. I remember greeting him at the door and bringing him a very humble little man. And he sits there quietly in a corner while everybody's talking. And then finally my mother says, okay, so say something. So he starts talking about, they come to me with these pills and they say that they had this experience and this, and it took them to this place and took them to that place. And I tell them, it takes work. If you didn't take yourself there, you were never there. And that's about all that he said. A little more, he elaborated a little more, I don't remember the words, but it had a powerful impact on the people that were there. Just those few words. So some people have said to me that, Tzvi, your generation, there were a lot of Baalei Tshuva in those years in the 70s. Started around 67 and went on for over 10 years, this big wave of Baalei Tshuva. And certainly it had much to do with your minds were opened up by the use of psychedelics. And like, you couldn't avoid it. You walked down, where I lived, you walked down the street, you went to school, whatever. It was just everywhere. So your minds were opened up by that. So I had to think about that a long time, because is that so? It's hard to just dismiss that. So what I think from the people that are chevra at that time, there were very few real acid heads. Okay, there were some who came with serious addictions. They were very strong people to have gone into recovery and really lasted that long. But it doesn't seem, it wasn't those people who were really into the acid experience or the mushroom experience. I mean, we had at the airport, there was a place everybody knew where the mushrooms grew. It was more that there was an atmosphere of seeking. And it was cool to be a seeker, to be seeking the truth. And there was a lot of discussion and dialogue about that. And Adarabba, the people who ended up as Baalei Tshuva were the people who saw this stuff as a dead end. As one of my friends put it, who's a well-known musician in Crown Heights from his time, my friends were dying. I didn't want to die. So there was an environment of that, of seeking. And what I'm hopeful is that the interest now in psychedelics is really driven by a desire to have something real, to really get to the truth. People are going to therapy now not just because they feel I'm ill, I have a problem, because they want to have a real life. They don't want to go through life with all this heavy baggage. If I'm going to live, I want to go all the way, really live. And if I'm going to be a Jew, I'm going to be a chassid, I want to have the experience. I want to be able to daven and feel it when I'm davening. And so some people say, well, take this pill and that's it. So if you want to fry out your brain and like you fry your eggs in the morning, I can't say, I have nothing to say. It's a beautiful brain. It's like they say, it's the most complex structure in the known universe. Want to fry it? Fine, okay. But if you're really seeking and searching, then there's a lot to talk about. And the Ikar is, you have to know that lo yagati umatasi al tamin, the way the world is designed is you don't get anything real. You don't get anything real unless you put a real investment in it. Okay, that's my 2 bits. I hope we'll have some nice discussion this evening.
Okay, thank you very much, Tzvi. So I think if I'm going to try and very briefly summarize what your message, it's that, I think it's relatively clear that the Rebbe was relatively strongly opposed to the idea of using LSD recreationally / in the pursuit of spiritual insight, because spiritual insight is something, if it's going to be real, has to be gained through, the active pursuit of insight. But that being said, the emphasis is perhaps more on the actively pursuing insight than it is on the not using a psychedelic. And then perhaps that then leaves some space for further conversation about the varieties of psychedelics and what the objective and intent is in using them, perhaps, etc. Is that fair?
You paraphrase it. I don't know if it's not clear to me what you're saying. You're saying that there's still room for what?
The main point being perhaps that a psychedelic or any substance should not be used in replacement for putting in the work to try and inspire oneself, using our minds, using our Chabad, our Chokhmah bin Adas, empowering ourselves with information, understanding and integrating that information, using that to inform our perspective and the way we perceive the world and experience it. And that if someone is using a substance in replacement of that, then that makes it wrong by definition, because that's something that needs to be achieved through work, not through a substance.
So it's two separate things. One is to say, a person can a person not have a spiritual experience using this drug? There the Rebbe says, if it were possible, he's not shelo, maybe it is, but he doesn't think it is, but maybe. Is that the proper path? No, the proper path is to do it yourself. But I can't say categorically, neither from this letter nor from my own experience, if a person had one time such an experience, is that going to open his mind up more for this? What I can do, and maybe I'll show you this other, a line from the Rebbe Rashab. I'm sharing my screen again over here. No, that's not the right one. Why does it give me the wrong one each time? Really nasty. So this is a letter, Lechem HaKal. Close this and get out my Lechem HaKal one. Stop share. Try again. I guess you're not seeing a letter there, are you?
No, it's not showing up.
Now are you?
Yes, now we got it.
Okay. So here in Kunstz Aveda, beautiful line. It's talking about you're trying hard, you're trying to have a hergesh, something through your Veda. As Hiseris Ava, through Shkidas Aveda, and how to make it that you can get there. And the next paragraph, the reason for this coldness at the beginning of hisbeinenus, when you start doing this work, you're trying to do your contemplation, your hisbeinenus. The ikar is because it's hard, and you don't want to. You don't want to do this. I mean, it's natural. We always seek like the easiest way out, and yagia, hard work with your brain and with your heart. You don't want to do that. And then this line, ubafrat misha hurgo b'mixus belechem akal b'espalis adjimyenin me'esbenis b'bechinas klalis covered alav b'yisrael. Somebody who already got just a little bit used to easy bread. What's easy bread? He imagined that he got excited. His palis dimyeni. Imaginary excitement from just thinking about things in general. Like he had this imaginary wow, the wowness experience. So then it becomes much harder for him to do the real thing. So here's where you would see that, yeah, okay, maybe even let's say the person has a wow experience through the means, artificial means. So maybe he's opened up to that, but it's going to make it harder for the person now to make the investment because he's used one time you got that free stuff. It makes it so much harder for you. So like I said, it's two separate things. Could a person have a spiritual experience through it? Maybe, maybe not. Is that going to help them in their Avoda? Is that the way? It could well be to the detriment of your Aveda through getting there for real. Could be, but it's not really the way to get there. And there are other means. The only means that really work are those that require big investment on your part.
All right, thank you. So
that's it.
Just then, I guess to follow up with that, and rather than pose this as a question to you, I think it's going to make a perfect segue into to introduce Divi as a clinician in psychiatric practice, which is that the Rebbe talks about using it. The Rebbe seems to be relatively clearly, let's say, more or less opposed to the use of LSD as proposed in the person that was asking the Rebbe about it there. The question then becomes, if it's being used as a clinical treatment of a pathology, of an illness, and it's going to be bringing someone relief, the question is, to what degree is that perhaps almost a completely separate conversation? And I think Mrs. Bogart is going to have a lot to share with us on that topic.
Okay, thanks for having me. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes.
So 100%, the investment is key, and we're going to get out of something what we put in. And that's the message here, including when we're looking at utilizing medicines that are essentially from the creator. So whether we categorize things as natural versus artificial, these are essentially medicines that are here in the world. Some of them are very much part of the natural world. And they're tools, powerful tools that we've been given. And powerful tools need to be used responsibly. So I just want to take a moment to acknowledge our limited perspectives on such a huge topic, right? We're all human beings here. So I have explored ways of helping people, and I've studied psychiatry and psychotherapy. And in working on a day-to-day basis with people who are suffering, I realized that it was easy to approach the limits of what we could offer, and that some of the cases that we were struggling with were really almost larger than life. People who are carrying very deep wounds from childhood, people who are carrying wounds that are intergenerational, people who are carrying wounds of the community, right? I know in Gabor Mate's recent book, one of the segments that has been quoted quite a bit over the past couple months is that in some cultures, when a person struggles from mental illness, the family or the community actually thanks this individual for helping the family or community see the areas in which the family or community needs to grow, right? So I come to this conversation from a perspective of waking up each day and striving to do my best to serve people who are crying out in pain, right? So to me, this conversation has very little to do with historical context a historical context or even contemporary context where people are engaging recreationally, right? This conversation for me is not about casual use or recreational use or experimenting for fun with altered states of mind. This is about healing pain, psychic pain, working with trauma, which is essentially a sacred responsibility, right? I want to just call to this conversation the letter from the Rebbe, which I may not have all the history on, about meditation, when people were coming to meditation as seeking relief from suffering. And the Rebbe wrote a letter to, the letter was to, I believe, a psychologist. I could be wrong on that. It was to Dr. Yehuda Landis. You could see the letter, but the letter was essentially asking and essentially even used strong language such as that mental health professionals, psychiatrists, psychologists, psychoanalysts have a sacred responsibility to educate themselves in how to utilize this tool of meditation in a kosher way. So to me, this letter is directed more to the times of what's actually occurring here. People are in pain and they're looking, oh, wow, there are modalities for healing that, by the way, are not new at all, right? These ways of working with medicines, medicines that may have psychedelic properties, but medicines that essentially originate in the earth, so plant medicines. And I'll talk a little bit more about these specifically and help give us some basic understanding of what we're actually talking about. But the idea of using these medicines to go into other states of consciousness, to rework pain or trauma is actually really old, right? So as we appreciate that and respect that, I'm going to bring this conversation back to empowering people who are listening because they care, right? And because maybe they're looking for healing or they know somebody who's looking for healing, to realize that while this is a very huge topic, common sense applies, right? So when you're thinking about a treatment, you are going to seek out a practitioner, right? Who you feel safe around and who has demonstrated good results. There are many ways you can know that a practitioner has demonstrated good results, but trusted word of mouth is really important. And I say that because while the Rebbe is calling for therapists to educate themselves, actually, people who have gone through medical school may not have any experience working with plant medicines, right? So we're seeking out practitioners who actually have experience to work with medicines in a safe and a responsible way, because we would never want anybody to get hurt, right? Also, one thing I would like to convey is in therapeutic work in general, but how much more so when you're dealing with such a powerful tool like a psychedelic medicine, the practitioner's qualifications are not just their degree or what they learned in school, right? It's the inner work that they do as a human being that enables them to be present in a true and loving way. So while that is true of a therapist, it is true even more so in a situation where we are going into a realm with a person that is very sensitive. So psychedelic medicines are powerful tools. There are many, many years of traditions around using them for healing. So we want to bring that to our time. And to be honest, we are not yet quite equipped to deliver this treatment to the many, many people who may want it. We're still building infrastructure. We're still figuring out how do we merge the training from these traditions with people in our culture who are trained in a different way to be therapists. We're still figuring all of that out. So it's important to understand that even the professionals are essentially beginners in a way in learning how to work with these medicines for healing. I want to just step back because I was asked to give some clinical information, scientific information, right? And here we are, we're talking about psychedelic medicines. And some of you may be wondering what we're actually talking about, right? So the most commonly discussed psychedelic medicines, there's one that is now offered legally through medical clinics, and that's ketamine. Okay, ketamine is actually not considered a classic psychedelic. It has a different mechanism of action. It's a glutamate blocker, and it's specifically used for depression and pain. Those are the most common indications. It can be used for other things, okay? One of its advantages is that it can be given in a legal setting. Another advantage is it can be combined with other psychiatric medications, okay? Now, ketamine is also very short acting. So the journey or the experience is about 1 hour. So the treatment itself may be about 3 hours. One of its limitations is that the effects are also relatively short-lived. So you might need repeated treatments. Now, let me take a moment there to state that the idea that this is a shortcut or free bread is not necessarily resonating with my clinical experience. In my clinical experience, when these tools are handled properly, people are actually utilizing them to do deep, difficult, challenging work, right? So when the set and setting is appropriate for therapeutic work, then people are going to be able to use it for therapeutic work, okay? And that needs to be worked with after the experience, right? And that is where the skills of a good practitioner or a good treatment plan come into play, right? We go into this experience and we're able to open ourselves up in some way, and then we need to come out of this experience and work with that, right? We're not going to get any results for free. We're going to have to work for them, okay? But sometimes there are wounds that go so deep that by attending weekly therapy, we're moving so slowly that this person is not having the quality of life that they need, right? So sometimes there's real reasons for why we would need to accelerate the healing process or go deeper with an individual. And I'm going to come back to the specific medicines we're talking about, but I'll just take a moment to give you a frame of reference for essentially, why are we doing this? What are we expecting to have happen in the journey from a clinical perspective? So some of the things that can occur in a non-ordinary state of consciousness is that we can come face to face with our full self, in the sense that we may be able to look at aspects of ourselves that are difficult for us to see when our guard is up. We may see new possibilities for ourselves and for our lives and for our relationship with ourselves. We may be able to rework trauma or things that have occurred to us in the past with less fear or in a way that we didn't think possible before. We may be able to relate to the practitioner or the therapist in a deeper way than before. We may be able to process pain in our bodies and actually digest it. The body keeps the score, not just in our thoughts, but in our soma, in our body. And we may be able to find our center, a place in which we can be ourselves and hold difficult emotions without becoming overwhelmed. And we may be able to better align with our truth as an individual, and that can bring peace of mind. How is this occurring in a journey? Well, these are potent psychoactive compounds that have very intense effects on the human mind and psyche. So some of the theories, which are theories actually, because we actually know very little about how the human mind works. Neurobiology is actually much more complicated than I can ever address, right? I'm a clinician primarily, okay? But some of the theories are that these compounds quiet or dissolve our default mode network, right? So our usual conditioned mode of operating in the world, okay? And when that dissolves temporarily, psychic material can be reworked and new connections can be made, okay? And the key word here is temporarily, because we only want to dissolve the default mode network temporarily because it's there for a reason. The way our brains operate is designed for us to be able to function day to day. So in a safe setting, we may loosen the grip on that so we can rework what we're carrying. But then the goal is for all of this to come back together in a gentler and more nourishing way, a more life-giving way. And some of the other theories have to do with a neurobiological reset or more neuroplasticity and flexibility and brain regions that don't typically speak to each other, communicating. Also changes in activation. So let's say the amygdala, the fear, where fear and primitive emotions, that can be quieter at times. The hippocampus, where memory can be stored, there can be changes of inactivation there. So memories can be accessed in new and different ways, okay? So ketamine, I hope you have some sense of why we might be thinking about it. Other psychedelics that are very much being discussed, you maybe just give me like fingers on how many minutes I have left. But okay, other psychedelics that are being discussed are essentially plant medicines or medicines from the earth, like ayahuasca. Ayahuasca is a very unique medicine. And it's a combination of ayahuasca, which has an MAOI, which breaks down a certain enzyme that allows DMT to become activated in the brain. Okay? And DMT is a psychedelic. Okay, ayahuasca is a very powerful tool. It can allow for very deep healing. It has a lot of medication interactions. So the safety around that has to be very, very cautiously handled. People have to be very appropriately screened. People have to be working with a practitioner who's trained in an ayahuasca tradition. Essentially, Western practitioners do not have training to work with ayahuasca. So it requires having a practitioner who has lived and done their own work with ayahuasca and also worked with somebody who has trained them in an ayahuasca tradition, and somebody who can hold space for a group, because ayahuasca is generally given in a group. When you have an experience like this in a group, it involves much more intense dynamics than when you're one-on-one or one-on-one with a therapist. So it's entering a situation like that is pretty high level. It's pretty sophisticated, right? You really want to know and be informed what you're signing up for. Psilocybin is the active ingredient in many species of mushrooms, okay? And that is also considered a classic psychedelic. MDMA is also very often discussed in clinical discussions. There's a lot, the research on MDMA for PTSD is the closest to FDA approval of all of these medicines. And that's because MDMA is unique. It's an empathogen. So it is more of a heart, it is colloquially considered a heart opener. So it's actually serotonergic amphetamine, and it also releases oxytocin. So there can be a lot of bonding that occurs. So it's more in the studies, it is used in the context of two therapists who are working with an individual and utilizing this time when they're more open emotionally and more in touch with their raw emotions to work through essentially trauma. And their research in veterans, people with other types of trauma in general, is very favorable. However, the bonding that can occur does leave people vulnerable, and it really requires being extremely cautious about the quality of the practitioner, that they're really able to go into that vulnerable space with an individual and keep all boundaries and ensure that all boundaries are respected, and that the open-heartedness and the bonding that occurs is for healing and not, God forbid, to be re-traumatizing. So the possibilities for healing, and my message here to the people who are listening, is essentially one of hope, right? They would say about the medicines, plant medicines, that when you're ready for them, they'll find you. So I encourage us to think broadly about our healing and to remain open to possibilities, and to also understand, and I'll just end off on this note, that the idea of using different states of consciousness for healing is not limited to psychedelic medicines. There are many other ways of accessing other states of consciousness that can allow us to go deeper into our true selves and find our center. And some of those are well known. Some of those are found in Hasidus, different methods of hispainus and tefillah, meditation and mindfulness, doing acts of kindness, working with breath work, working with the body movement, and working with different types of music. So there are many paths to home. There are many paths to healing, and everybody deserves full healing.
Thank you very much. So I would say again, to maybe briefly summarize the message that I got from what you were saying. I think one thing that you've presented that's very important is that our expectations should be realistic and well informed, and we should understand that when we hear about someone who went and used psychedelics for a therapeutic objective and had amazing results, that's the way the story is often told. But what it actually looks like is not going and taking psychedelics and having amazing results, so much as the psychedelics being used to enhance and to maybe augment the tremendous hard work that they're engaged in and things that they're doing. And like you said, there's no free ride, and that includes psychedelics. We're going to move on to Rabbi Rosenfeld just a second. If you could maybe address very briefly in 30 to 60 seconds. Obviously, this is not, I'm not asking you to condone or anything like that, but let's say that someone they've heard a lot about this, they're very interested, someone feels like, you know what, I need this help, I'm going to go pursue this, if maybe I have to go somewhere else. I know that there are people, wouldn't be surprised if there are people in the audience who are dealing with this, people who are in pain, people who are struggling, to get results and to achieve acceptable quality of life with the work that they're already putting in. Are there any specific, very tangible words of caution that or suggestion, advice that you would give people if they're really considering sort of going and experimenting, seeking at the level of actually going to engage and experience, perhaps try to use psychedelics?
You're asking me, or you're asking
No,
Divi?
Divi.
I would say slow and steady is a good approach. really gather information, seek guidance from those that you trust, seek guidance from those who have been through their healing journey and are living lives that you respect, and have a frame of reference for working with these medicines. And recognize that it's about your investment, and it also takes fortitude to find the right setting and practitioner to work with. And all of the preparation that you put into your healing, whatever your next step is, pays off. It's like a cumulative effect. So taking your time to prepare and be mindful and make intentional choices, and really be intentional and honest with yourself about the next steps that you're taking, will only make the healing more sustainable and more authentic.
Well, thank you very much. Okay, and now Rabbi Rosenfeld, with your being in a position to bring together both the clinical side of things and the spiritual, ruchnistic side of things, according to Chassidus, according to Pnimis Torah. Take it away.
Okay, Beseder, you can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I think that the nature of the conversation thus far reflects the nature of the topic under discussion, to the extent that, like Divi pointed out, we are dealing with a emergent system. We are dealing with something apparently new, something ancient, yes, in certain elements of cultural spaces, ancient as ancient can be, but new within our tradition. Not that tradition is the fundamental question here whatsoever. A lot of people want to ensure that they can trace everything new back to the deepest parts of tradition, and lav dafka, that is not specifically the way that novelty takes place. So there is something new taking place, and it touches upon some of the deepest sensibilities from a spiritual perspective, as well as the deepest possibilities from a physical, physiological, neurological, psychological perspective. So I think that, as Rav Tzvi pointed out, as Rav Tzvi Shlita pointed out, that the Lubavitcher Rebbe's letter, for those who the Lubavitcher Rebbe's statement is binding for, and again, I think we can take the Lubavitcher Rebbe's das in this position as the das of tzaddikim. And I believe the letter, in spite of the fact that it's not transcribed by hand, I think it contains a profound precision as to the nature of the very conversations we would be happening so many years afterwards. The Rebbe seems very clear at the beginning to make a quick distinction between physical health, which includes mental health, I believe without a question, that mental health is not different than physical health. It manifests itself differently, but the mind is very much, if not the most significant element of the body. And again, we have to ensure that we're fighting against years, millennia of stigmatization against mental health being treated as physical health. So mental health for a very long time has been relegated to, character defect, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that from the physiological perspective of medicine, the emergent possibilities are deeply significant. And I think the Lubavitcher Rebbe sequesters that space off without needing to really discuss it. And then the Lubavitcher Rebbe seems to enter into a space of the question of utilizing these ancient technologies for the sake of spiritual development and spiritual connectivity, or what is phrased as mystical insight. And I think that so far, straight down the number line, we see that from a physiological perspective, Dr. Bogart, what you're describing is, I believe, the hope that exists in the framework of the medical field of this, from Aleph to Taf, meaning halavai, there should be more like you in Klal Yisrael that have the wherewithal, the education, the knowledge, the insight, the confidence to direct those in need. And need is obviously a relative term. Each person has the decision to decide what they feel they truly need. But to be the space necessary for the unfolding natural reality that this will be a part of Jewish healing, of Jewish medicine, of psychiatric fields. And it's only, thankfully, capitalism has undone itself because it sees that there's a monetary gain to finally allow the possibility of these things to enter into the system, unlike was done many years ago with LSD, which shut the whole thing down from a very quick point. And so now, thankfully, we get to eat from the decisions of them, that we can utilize this for a medical reality. But I think that it's important to note that to speak from the medical perspective, there's only a little bit that I want to add from my own experience from the medicinal element of this. I think that there is an ideal form of a person's ability to engage in medicine. And there is no shortage for the need to engage in medicine. There's no shortage. Everybody is immensely exhausted. Everybody is traumatized to one degree or another. We live in a post-traumatic culture. We are post-traumatic subjects. One need not validate their suffering. Each person, in accordance with their own understanding of the stability of their trauma, we do not need to validate our need to seek out something that offers even a semblance of comfort. Magia lanu, to a certain degree. Magia to the Jews, to the people of the world, that if something emerges that can offer a little bit of an easier path to ease the burden of life a little bit more, then why not? And herein lies the danger of it. The issue with psychedelic usage, the issue with any substance usage is not a moral or ethical problem. The notion that this is a moral or ethical question has done so much damage that it did as much damage as it possibly could do, to the point where we had to move away from it. And so to continue looking at this process as a continuity of a war on drugs can't be the way. It's a new future language that we have to address the possibility that these medications can in fact be beneficial. The issue is that people like Dr. Bogart don't exist. They exist, but it's still an emergent field. And the educational frameworks that are necessary, and the psychiatric frameworks and the medical frameworks and the psychological frameworks that are necessary to properly and safely engage with the process of allowing the mind to drop out and open up without knowing what one might find. R.D. Lang said, and Gabor Mate, Shlita, you should live a long and very healthy life. He's a Heilige Yid. That he says that R.D. Lang, who was the founder of the anti-psychiatry movement, who wanted to undo all of the stigma involved with mental health completely and to look at it from a healing perspective, to realize that not only are they healthy, but we're also sick, and to have like a certain interaction and a dance between the two. Said the three things that we're most afraid of is death, other people, and our own minds. And it's for good reason. As they say in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, the mind is a dangerous neighborhood from time to time, especially when it's been so hurt over and over. And it is not so easy to undo the amount of years of traumatic conditioning and comorbidity and neurological issues, as well as inherent propensity towards mental health issues, which sometimes emerge at later ages. This is not only playing with fire, this is entering into fire. Fire has the capacity to clean and cleanse and reduce and change and shift, but it also has the tendency and the possibility of burning and hurting. Not because it's a pathway to sin. From the medical perspective, pekuach nefesh is doiche Shabbos. We're not talking about right or wrong here. We're talking about the ability to use a medicine in a healthy way. And in that, I quite honestly, I defer myself completely to a person like Dr. Bogart, and I say that there should be more like her in Klal Yisrael to ensure that there is the space necessary, and there are more like her. There are programs that are set up to inform the necessity of preparation and integration, the before and the after, and the natural belief that a middle without a beginning and an end is nothing. A middle is a moment that without the framing of who I was before the experience and who I am after the experience is a meaningless burst of time that leads nowhere except to what Rabbi Freeman was describing before as almost this kind of development of a tolerance to a dopamine spike that is existent in any experience of not feeling myself for a second. And then so that's the medical side of it. Now I want to enter into a territory that touches upon the medical as well as the spiritual. It's an interface between the two. And then I want to shift a little bit more to the spiritual side. The realm of addiction, and one of the most significant areas of people who suffer. You want to see people who are suffering. You want to see the faces of suffering. You want to see people, right? You look at their bodies and individuals who are addicted to substances. And addiction is a funny concept nowadays as well, because of the plethora of, unfortunately, the streamlining of fentanyl and things like that, and heavy laced benzodiazepines into our communities and into our spaces. Addiction does not necessarily mean what addiction meant before. When, God forbid, a child goes to a house party and instead of smoking a joint, it finds out that it's been laced with some fentanyl, and they go, because of an overdose, into a rehab system, that's not somebody who is an addict in the sense that the spirituality of the 12 steps is going to work for. Addiction is a breaking down of the self to the degree where there's absolutely nothing left except the possibility of moving forward. But nowadays, addiction means a different thing sometimes. But in the space of trying to heal the traumas and trying to break free from the conditionality that a person finds themselves stuck in, very often, and it's difficult to be honest with oneself, the stimulation of the mind and the dopamine experience and the ecstatic nature of feeling something for a moment is highly intoxicating. And if I've been searching my whole life to feel something, and I haven't found it in school, and I haven't found it in the books that my teachers told me I would find it in, and I haven't found it at the Shabbos table, and I haven't found it in the natural things that people are describing I should do, and then I taste something that offers me the heavens, that offers me something that I've truly desired, and this is as true as it is for a l'chaim of vodka, as it is for sitting at an ayahuasca ceremony. Someone who's been hurt is going to say, I have found the victory. And when I have found victory and relief from the conditions of what I've been living in, to whatever degree I carry my pain, my intergenerational trauma, the fact that I'm alive is pain enough to want to ease it. And so we have to be careful that once a person tastes the possibility of a relief from pain, it's something that they're going to want to return back to. It would be ridiculous for them not to want to return back to it. And there's nothing natural that provides the same relief from pain as an artificial substance. It simply provides something that natural living cannot provide. So no matter how much of the usage may be insight related, in the end of the day, the irreducible reality is that it is a davar gashmi. And a davar gashmi can be the highest thing in the world. It could be an asev that's healing that comes from the ground, but it's still a davar gashmi. And when it's a davar gashmi that speaks naturally to the body, and when it speaks naturally to the body, these medicines very quickly become shot after shot of ayahuasca in the hopes of experiencing something. It becomes ketamine treatment over and over without any integration, and then it really looks like addiction again. And then my tool for inspiration turns into a handicap. And then the things that I tried to use to heal me become my new taskmasters. So it demands a razor sharp honesty. And again, why should a person not want to experience intoxicating states of being versus, leaning unflinchingly into life? I'm biased. Working in the field of addiction, the truth of the matter seems to be, and I believe this is emergent from Hasidus as well, that there's nothing more powerful than what a human being can do when they lean unflinchingly into reality itself. When we encounter God and this world and all of its heaviness and all of its realness, the zeh of it all, that is the highest possible state of dveikus imaginable, the dir b'tachtonim. If a person values such a perspective. So I think that there's a very important need to be careful here about pleasure seeking. And here the danger, like Dr. Bogart pointed out, of not charlatans. Nobody's doing it deliberately. Some people who do it deliberately, okay, they should be caught and it should be stopped. But the carelessness here and the fact that I've had a little bit of experience doesn't mean anything. The title of the Jimi Hendrix album was the Jimi Hendrix Experience. And the question was, are you experienced? Hilu, it's a secret like wink of the eye that says, yeah, the high that comes with this. And then more damage can be undone. Traumas cover traumas, and those traumas cover deeper traumas from time to time. And shifting a boulder when that boulder is not ready to be moved or when there's not a safety mechanism in place can create untold damages to the mind. And it can also uncover latent potencies of mental illness that are worse than what you experienced before. And so that's the addiction space of it. They say in AA, and it's a very powerful thing, they say if they created a cure for alcoholism, we would have become addicted to it. Because over here, a person tastes the secret of what the Mittler Rebbe describes as lahachyosam bara'av, to feed oneself on hunger. There are certain Neshamos in this world who the only high that they'll be able to truly experience is the one of yearning for the thing that they know they can't have. And here, I believe it transitions a little bit into Hasidus. Kedushasi lamala mikdushasechem. Hashem's holiness is perpetually ascendant and transcendent and infinitely removed from our capacity to grasp his holiness. anything in this world, anything that provides an artificial sense of wholeness, and I don't mean it has to be artificial, all senses of wholeness are artificial. If a person finds something where they think this brings me to the place that I need to be, it brings me to that promised land of perfection, of pure insight, of pure relief from the burden, ki'ilu, I can actually get relief from, I can learn how to cope with my burden in this world. I can learn how to thin out my burden. But something that tells me that the burden is completely gone, it is fundamentally important to realize that this is the hepech of Kedusha. Kedusha is the recognition. Forget Kedusha. I don't mean Kedusha in a judgmental type of way. I mean that which is numinous, that which is holy, that which is transcendent, that which is unspeakable to ourselves, even in the deepest elements of our own silence and our deepest moments of inspiration. That recognition that Amarti echakmeh v'hi rechoika mimenu. I said I was wise. I thought I had it. But after all is said and done, it is as infinitely removed from me as it was a moment before. That Atzmusa Yisparach never enters into the conversation. I am never grasping the essence of anything. And the danger of a vehicle that takes a person to a very lofty place on a spiritual perspective, and I believe this is where, as Rabbi Freeman pointed out so fundamentally, this is where the Lubavitcher Rebbe's teachings are fundamental. That yagati, lo yagati umatzati, meaning any notion of true matzati, I have arrived at that place that I have to stay at, and I don't have to put more effort, and I just have to return back to that original place, is the opposite of what Avodas Hashem is. Avodas Hashem is, from time to time, that recognition that I can't relieve all of the pain. There is a stone that we each carry in our heart. It's referred to as Even Ma'asu Habanim Haisalosh Pina. At the end of the day, the irreducibility of our traumas represents the constitutive shape of my subjectivity. I can't let go of it. I have to find Hashem in it. And in that sense, from a spiritual perspective, it can't be that the end of the Gullus and all of the yearning that we have, like the Baal Tanya says, halavai, that in Geula I should have the yearning that I felt in Gullus. It can't be that the answer to the spiritual question, not the healing question, but the spiritual question, is by way of some sort of technology that brings me to a place. Tachlis of Geula is to not need a teacher, to not need anything. As Ram Dass said, his Baba said, and with this I'll end, his Baba said that, I see all of you Americans, you're doing this medicine. And the Baba of Ram Dass, Richard Alpert, said, what is this? And Ram Dass tells over in his very powerful kind of video called Fierce Grace, his response to his stroke. And the Baba took like 40 tabs of LSD out of his hand. He was supposed to take one. And he sticks them all in his tongue. And Ram Dass and his friends like, oh boy, you're going to die. Like, oh boy. And the Baba closes his eyes in a certain way, very similar to the character in Rabbi Freeman's story. And after however long, he opens his eyes and he turns to them and he says, you do not need this. You do not need this. And with this, Rabbi, do I have 2 minutes to read a keta from a book that I think summarizes my feelings about this? And I think it's a very powerful book. It's from a book called The Presence Process by Michael Brown. I rarely read books like this anymore. I've read many books like this, but just for my own sake, I like to encounter the tzaddikim that hide within their books for my own anxiety relief. But this book was recommended to me, and it's a book about breath work, actually. It's a book about someone who found, medicines, especially ayahuasca, psilocybin ceremonies to be really the main path that he found. And then he came to a place where he decided that breath work in a again as significantly delicate way as and he found what he needed. And he said as follows. And this is, and I'll send a picture of this afterwards. And this is from The Presence Process, The Reawakening, and I'll read it as slowly and carefully as I can. It is also now apparent that even though respectful application of plant medicines and ceremonies activates an awareness of presence, for most of us, these tools are best viewed as signposts, not the road itself. Few are called to be, quote, medicine people as a way of life. I embrace these tools, these ceremonies, these medicines, and their dedicated caretakers as allies. I shall always feel this way about them. I know they have been placed on the human path to assist us in remembering what has been forgotten and to provide us with a glimpse of what is possible. However, I do not adhere to their approach as the way for everyone. The mechanisms of the way for everyone are already embedded within each of us, discovered as an inner design, a deliberate blueprint, and an intended birthright. Although rituals and ingested substances initiate an awareness of presence and enables us to experience present moment awareness, thereby providing much insight for humanity's evolution, their impact decays substantially after a while. Because they don't necessarily foster the accompanying day-to-day experience required for maintaining awareness, they are potentially as misleading as they are useful. Consequently, those who use this approach repeatedly to achieve and maintain awareness, without simultaneously using willpower and discipline to develop this capacity naturally, they risk succumbing to the contradiction of developing outer reliance in the name of inner development. It is my experience that for most of us, developing an authentic open-door relationship with presence and present moment awareness is best accomplished naturally through the conscious and sober accessing, accumulating, and applying of personal willpower and sustained discipline. Achieving present moment awareness is a way of life, a daily approach of living on this planet, not a one-time quick fix. It is a journey, not a destination. This natural approach is what the presence process now makes possible for all. And so in my mind, I think, really straddling both kind of positions with the recognition that they're speaking in different territories, I believe that kind of statement from Michael Brown, it humbly kind of conveys what I feel for now, that the L'Shem Yichud, even before considering anything, should be. Be'ezras Hashem.
Well, thank you very, very much. Okay, I'm going to move along now to Rabbi Ofer. And after we hear from Rabbi Ofer about his experience as a shliach in the global center of ayahuasca, we're going to come back and raise some questions, open up the floor to all the panelists, and maybe we'll have a bit of a farbrengen. So Rabbi Ofer Kripor, please.
Okay, hello everyone. English. So I hope the things. I couldn't agree more than with everyone who spoke until now. Really, you really described it very, very well. From the healing side, from the Rebbe side, from the spiritual side. And do you hear me? You hear me? Okay. So I could tell what I experience from the people who come here, which mean many people come to Peru to experience the plant medicine, and I can tell you that all the things that you said is you see it basically on the people that come here. You see people who come, backpackers who say, oh, let's give it a try, and trying it once and say, well, I had nice experience, and that's it. There are these people who come to really heal themselves from deep traumas and deep illness. And there are those people who look for a spiritual experience or spiritual open mind. And from what I see is that Rabbi Rosenfeld described it very well. The most problematic are those who are looking for the spiritual open mind, because those who are looking for healing, they do a process. It's a physical, mental healing. It's important. And if Hashem put this medicine in the world, and if you could just guide us how to use it well, then it's a medicine like any medicine that Hashem brought us. And those who's trying once and say, we had a nice experience and going on, nothing happened. But those who are looking for a spiritual experience, So the first experience is nice, and then they look for the other one and the other one. It's like way of life, and it's become lechem kal, like Rabbi Freeman says. And so if we want to look at this if do the person look for, and if he looks for healing, could help them, and if they look for fun, whatever. But if they look for the spiritual experience, they need to be very, very careful. So I don't have a lot to say. I just could share you with the experience I had with the people here. And thank you for the wisdom things that I hope I said correctly, that you all said. It really wised me next time I see people, and many people ask me about it. So I'm much more I'm smarter now than before. So thank all of you, and that's it.
Thank you very, very much. So we'll get to perhaps some questions from the chat shortly. A couple of things I want to bring up and sort of bring them up to be discussed openly to everyone in the panel, and everyone can sort of, offer your insight. One thing that strikes me as being very important, and probably you could say delicate, in something that's maybe subtle, and it's as subtle as it is important to make sure that it's, it's taken care of carefully, is that, when it comes to transcendental meditation, right, we have the stories of the letters of the Rebbe about transcendental meditation, and it's fascinating to see that the Rebbe went on this very, very proactive campaign, writing letters to people who were influential in medicine, in psychiatry, clinicians sort of at the top of the hierarchy, and asking them, because acknowledging, and the Rebbe acknowledges very clearly, and I think that you see here again perhaps a taste of how progressive the Rebbe is and was about a lot of things. This is 50 odd years ago. The Rebbe was acknowledging the very real potential therapeutic benefits of transcendental meditation, but at the same time expressed the concern for the fact that transcendental meditation traditionally and historically came with things that were associated with, on the borders of, sometimes outright avodah zarah. And because the Rebbe didn't want people to lose out on the potential benefits and therapeutic value of transcendental meditation, obviously also not wanting people to get caught up in things that are negative, the Rebbe requested of clinicians and people that they come up with protocols for meditations that will give the equivalent benefit and therapeutic value without the risks and the involvement in things that are negative. And when it comes to something like, let's say, a guided journey using psychedelics, using psilocybin, using MDMA, whatever it is, because a person is in such a vulnerable state, which is why obviously having a good clinician is so important. I wonder, what insight you have to offer about care that people can take, or caution in terms of making sure that, or what we can do, what the risks are of a clinician. And when it comes to anything therapeutic, in terms of psychotherapy, there's a fine line, and I see relatively frequently, that line being crossed, where someone in a position as a clinician, as a provider in a psychotherapeutic situation, will offer insight, suggestions, advice that starts to border or sort of veer off into the lane of hashkafa. When things can get very messy, when someone is blending their psychotherapy with hashkafa, and especially if it's a hashkafa that doesn't align with that of Torah. and when someone's, in an altered state of consciousness using psychedelics, obviously they're going to be more vulnerable. And I wonder, what any and all of you have to say in terms of things that people can be aware of, perhaps things that people should be cautious of, and if there are things people can do to try to minimize, the risk of becoming perhaps exposed in this vulnerable state to something that is not purely clinically psychotherapeutic, but veers off into the hashkafic where things could become very problematic. And please just unmute yourselves and share what you have to say.
I defer myself.
Okay.
I have what to say, but I'll say after. I'd like to listen.
We're all waiting for somebody else to speak first.
Sure. So I'll open my mouth. First off, I don't know. I don't know the practicalities of what it looks like and the types of access points that practitioners or so-called practitioners have with the people that they're working with. But it is a profoundly significant point to understand that it's a suggestible state, and the person can be exposed to. I'm not necessarily as concerned as foreign spiritual notions as destructive psychological ideas, but my assumption is that people are not deliberately being harmful. Is an assumption, and I don't know if that's a safe assumption to make, but it's an assumption. But again, I think it just speaks to the significance of what Divi described before as the fundamental need to vet and determine with as close to certainty as you can the practitioner or the individual who's guiding you in whatever way that you've decided to engage in, their authenticity and their compassion towards your cultural sensibilities. Ultimately is what it is. I mean, these ceremonies are healing processes, whether it's a positive thing and whether it operates within the realm of healing or traverses it. For example, they take place in Borough Park with chazanim singing Hasidish and nigunim because they're dealing with Hasidish chevra who are engaged in it. Now, not speaking about the value of said process, there's a cultural sensibility that is fundamentally significant to any therapeutic dialogue. And generally speaking, the safety mechanism within therapy is that the therapist hopefully has come to a place of knowing that they really don't know anything that the client doesn't know. And it's no longer our job to provide insight. Freud was very much interested in insight. And ultimately, the clients revolted and they said, wait a second, if you're describing the human condition and you're human and you're pretending to not experience the human condition, then you're sicker than all of us. And the only saving grace to the psychotherapeutic, structure was Carl Rogers' decision to shift to a much more, client posture, which is unconditional positive self-regard, providing a safe space for the client in these medicines and the openness and the suggestibility. Meaning, I've had many people from a spiritual perspective reach out to describe what they've experienced in psychedelic experiences. And here, I believe that with regards to the question whether one has experienced the psychedelics themselves or they're just reading about it, if we're treating these things like the objects that they are, not the mystical gods that some conceive them to be, then they're as accessible based on secondhand account, not as accessible, but a person who has spent time on arrowid.org, there are resources that are profoundly significant in understanding the plethora of all of the various types of experiences that people go through. Not to say that it determines to a pinpoint what the conditionality is, but there is a similarity to it. And in those stages, a person is open to susceptibility, and a person is in a space where they can integrate ideas, especially if the practitioner is overbearing, manipulative, or more than likely just ignorant and clunky as a clinician, which just again highlights the distinction and the distance between the ideal state of these things and the realistic space we find ourselves in at this moment, and the hope that we need to uncover to bridge that gap, because otherwise it remains dangerous.
Can I add, I love this ideal state you described where we're aware that it's always just out of reach, right? And so much of this discussion is like, in an ideal scenario, we wake up and we take a breath and we're present and we're grateful for life. So the reason we're going down this whole rabbit hole of treatments and medicines and experiences is to get us back to that point, right? Like the famous poem, like to arrive back home and realize and recognize the place for the first time, right? So speaking to the therapist and cautions and safety around that, this has been a question and dilemma since the origins of psychotherapy, right? Minus the medicine work, right? How you're going into a space where you're being vulnerable with another human being. They're just another human being. So how do you know they're going to be helpful rather than harmful, right? This has always been a question. This is actually a really important question, right? And so practically, this speaks to the importance of trusted referrals based on a word of mouth network that is coming from people you can trust. I want to remind us that we're all humans. So at some point we have to trust our process, trust Hashem, trust ourselves, right? There was a movement from blank slate, Freud, right, to like Rogers, unconditional positive regard, but there's still space for us to evolve and own unconditional love, like as being a force of healing, right? How do we know that somebody has unconditional love to offer if we feel loved in their presence? How do we know somebody is safe to be around if we feel a felt sense of safety in their presence? So our judgment is imperfect, but we have the capacity to utilize our judgment to actually interview, spend time with a practitioner, and be honest with yourself about how you feel in those interactions, right? Are they receptive to your feedback without being defensive, right? Do they seem to have an agenda, even if it's a good agenda, but it's their agenda? And if you're unsure, then ask people you trust or gain more information about their reputation in a community that you trust. And if you're unsure, then take your time and gather more data. How else are we going to proceed safely? And I just want to also say to Joey, your beautiful description of a new way of thinking about addiction. There are no easy answers here, right? And especially since I'll just bring in the perspective of food, since a lot of my clinical time has been with people struggling with their relationship with food, right? And some people may use a framework of addiction to understand those challenges. But we appreciate that food is not going anywhere in the human experience. Food can also be intensely pleasurable and create a dopamine surge that leaves you coming back for more. It can induce a high, right? So in that realm, we have to reckon with how to cultivate a healthy relationship with something that, yes, can be used, misused, and abused, like all resources and tools.
Thank you. Anyone else have anything to share?
I just want to say a few things because Joe and especially Divi were talking about the word was trust and caring. The most powerful experiences in my life have been the few times I've been at a real Hasidic warm verbringen, where I felt I was amongst people who were caring and that I could trust. And we were able to open up to one another. And those were very transformative experiences. But like I said, very rare, very rare. And my understanding is that there was a time when there was a lot more of that. And I remember the Alter Hasidim from a Yor and Mendel Fotefasi walk into the room and immediately you felt that. The times I talked with certain older mishpim, that you felt that I can trust him. He's not gonna judge me. He's not going to talk to other people about me. He's listening to me. He has only one care. He cares about what I have to say. And at one time, I had sat in a yeshiva where I had friends like that, to a degree. So that caring, trusting, warm atmosphere was something, yeah, we had it in our tradition. We had it there. And we lost it. Maybe we drowned it in mashka, maybe we just became too busy, maybe we became too artificial. But now we're trying to replace it with a pill. I really believe it's what Divi was talking about, this suspension of your, I can't remember the terms you use, but your natural, how you navigate the world all the time, that's suspended beautifully. When you're singing together a beautiful niggun together, you're so close to each other. You like many people taking up no space. It's suspended at that point, and you're with friends, and you're building a community. We need to resuscitate that. We need to bring that back. That's a beautiful, powerful experience. Instead of saying, well, soon it's going to be in the hands of big pharma, and there's going to be schools teaching therapists how to do this, and we go to them and so on. Let's recreate it inside our own community, that you have that trusting atmosphere. I'm not negating that somebody should go to the right therapist with the right needs when they need that. But all of us, like Joey said, all of us today need healing. And we have the tools to do that healing. And we seem to have buried them. I also want to make one other comment there, along the lines of caring and trust. There are people posting to the Q&A anonymously, and that's a sixth thing in our society. Shouldn't be done. If you have something to say, tell us who you are. We want to be able to trust you. We want to have a warm and open environment. Don't come in anonymously, please.
Thank you for that, Tzvi. And I think that everything that you just said, which I think sort of maybe changed the speed and the level of the conversation a little, and really took things a lot deeper, maybe we could say, sort of segues into something else that I would love to hear from everybody about, which is, you know, that there's what they call the biopsychosocial model of depression and mental illness, right? Which is that there's a biological aspect of neurotransmitters and hormones, and then there's the psychological aspect and the social aspect. And the truth is, I think that in a sense, if you look at it in its purest form, they're not actually separate things, right? And that's where, as you know, as we heard earlier, that the mind is we know so little about the brain and the mind and how they work, and there's so much that we don't understand in terms of the complexity of the fact that the brain is an organ, and there are neurotransmitters which can impact the way we think and feel, and then we can also at the same time actively manage our thoughts, which can then have effects on our neurotransmitters and hormones. You know, things are very circular, and what seems to me to be sort of a bit of a change in direction in, you know, in sort of mental health and the way things are moving is a sort of a widespread recognition, people starting to, you know, not necessarily starting, but an awakening of the fact that as powerful as medications, you know, SSRIs, etc., can be, and they can provide a lot of relief, and they are and can and do save lives every single day, there are also limitations. And perhaps because of the extent to which we've relied perhaps on medications, people have forgotten or lost touch with how powerful and therapeutic it can be to, you know, touch grass, to have a real profound connection with a friend, with family, with community, with the things that give us purpose and meaning, you know, and being active and making a difference. And these things can have such a powerful effect also on, you know, on our serotonin and on our dopamine and things like that. I'd love to hear, you know, from any and everyone, thoughts that you have to share about perhaps the balance and the interplay and maybe synergy between medications where they're necessary and, let's say, non-medical approaches, and the power that they can have, perhaps the limitations of the two, how people can coordinate and, you know, make the most of all the different things that come together here in this picture.
Yeah, neurobiology is a really complicated road home. because it's fascinating. You can strive to understand it, and then you wonder, well, how much does this change my clinical practice? Right? So amazingly, we're wired for the simple things that Rabbi Freeman is talking about. Like love has a potent psychoactive effect, neurophysiological effect. You can strive to analyze it, or you can see that if you give a person love, you can see it on their face, right? Like if you give a plant sunshine and water, it thrives. So in some ways, if we were all loving and being loved by each other, we'd be healed, right? So what's the complication? We shut down because of experiences we've had or because of a lack of love. And then the healing process is this nuanced way of opening a person back up, right? Instead of opening up toward love, they may be afraid when love approaches because they've been hurt by it before, right? So then we're in this dance of opening just enough that a person can trust and creating a receptivity to love again. But ultimately, the message of these medicines is that we are the medicine, right? We have all of the resources we need within ourselves. And as we become more loving to ourselves, we have more unconditional love to offer each other. We could talk about sitting down at a farbrengen and being loving with each other, but if we lack love toward ourselves, how can we truly be loving toward others, right? V'ahavta l'reacha kamecha, right? If we want to love another, we have to have love for ourselves. So that's what the healing work is actually all about. And if we want to make a difference in our community, let's bring back more of what we know allows us to thrive as humans. How do you know what allows people to thrive as humans? From your experience as a human being, right? So halavai, we bring back more of beautiful community, and in our homes, we pay more attention to what it actually means to be present with ourselves and with our children and with our loved ones. This is, of course, the basis of healing and all that we actually care about, right? Now, the neurobiology, I don't think we're going to really understand it here, but it's a long process. And through appreciating and understanding the nuances of it, we can come up with interventions that are more useful with fewer side effects. But psychiatric medications, like I am pro anything that helps somebody live their life more fully and suffer less. But in the realm of trauma, psychiatric medications have many limitations in terms of their effectiveness and their side effect profile. So I just wanted to say, if somebody is considering working with plant medicines or psychedelics in order to transition away from psychiatric medications, not because psychiatric medications aren't good for the right person, but because they're looking to move their healing process forward in a different way. The goal is to become more and more independent over time. That's how you know you're utilizing it as a medicine rather than as an addictive substance. If you're needing it more and more over time, that's the addictive loop. If you're becoming more and more independent, that's a healing trajectory.
Amazing response, Divi. And it could be a cynicism of, or just a callousness to having operated in an addiction field in particular, which allows me to have seen kind of the hither side of substance usage, no matter what the substance was. I do still question the ability for a person to properly discern what the motivation behind the continued usage is. But again, that would be very clear to a person if a person is trying to have an ayahuasca ceremony 6 days a week. So I hope that a person like that would realize that this is problematic. So I want to just move back to the question that Rabbi Yisroel brought up, which is the question of the balance or the imbalance between the psychiatric movement and kind of the model of more of a natural organic form of healing. And I think that these conversations, unfortunately, as wonderful as they are, and we may be on the cusp of a shift that allows the conversation to actually change, but we still operate within a system that has functioned in accordance with psychiatry and the theory of diagnostics, which operates above or below a mythological, one can argue, line of normalcy. And so anybody who deviates away from the functional space of normalcy is deemed to be dysfunctional. And in the past, it was institutionalization to ensure that a person can then ascend back upwards with good behavior back to the line of above normal. If not, they would maintain, themselves in the institutionalized state. And so I think to try and deconstruct the psychiatric movement and its, one can say, minimizing of an infinite expression of human experience to what the DSM-5 would diagnose as F13.1 severe, which is a ridiculous nature of bizayon of the human experience. I think the ever-growing kind of revolutionary voice that Gabor Mate certainly plays a role in, and R.D. Laing, and many of this new path of healing, it's important to understand they're not speaking as psychiatrists. They might be speaking as medical doctors who see a broken system, but I think that it's important to still keep in mind the functional work that SSRIs and what typical psychiatrists and psychiatric care is going to provide for an individual. The way I like to kind of look at it, Rabbi Yisroel, is that let's operate in accordance with this mythological line of normal. And we can say that good life is 5 rungs above the 0 line. The assumption is we're born with a tabula rasa, a clean slate. We all share a basic level of neurological health, which is obviously a mythological statement. And then the goal is to get to 5. And so that's not such an impossible distance, 0 to 1, 1 to 2. And if I find myself parked at 3 in life, that's not so bad. Someone who suffers from a chemical imbalance, which prevents them from finding calm. And we can trace, as Divi pointed out, neurobiology is a profoundly ever-changing wisdom that in the end of the day shows us how little we know as opposed to how much we know. That we know a lot and we can image more and more. And there was a quantum shift when we developed technologies of neuroimaging and neuroscanning, but we still know very little about what exactly is what when it comes to the inner workings and the fundamental motivations of the neurochemicals and the neurotransmitters at their core. And so what an SSRI does, for example, an SSRI, which is, and I'm using this as an example because Lu Yitzur, that the APA is correct to assume that 4 out of 5 adult cohorts suffer some form of an anxiety disorder or not. Now that's not a chiddush. That's not a chiddush. The world is anxiety. The most natural thing to be in this world is anxious. The world is a place of anxiety. It's part of the human condition. But if a person, so it's not a question of whether one has anxiety or not. It's everybody has one degree of anxiety or another. The question is, at what level is the anxiety measuring? Is the volume so loud that it blocks you from the ability to function? At which point diagnostics begin to be a significant language, which provides medicinal help if needed. And if not, then it begins to be a spectrum of coping mechanisms. So if I'm functioning at a level of 1 of the volume, so then breath and mindfulness are going to really kind of nip the problem in the bud. But if I'm suffering at a level of 38, where I can't hear anything and I can't get up in the morning, and then you throw depression and all other forms of mental illness into the mix, these are some states of being and states of bodily functioning that are so severe that almost like in the stories of like the Shadim, right? They laugh at the petty tools of mindfulness and healing that we offer. The mind, when it's twisted and turned in a neurological level, can be profoundly severe. It's not to say that we are stuck within a medicinal framework, but we operate within a medicinal framework at this point. And I think the healthy way of looking, but let's return back to a calmer place of like anxiety. If I'm at a state of dysfunction, an SSRI, Ledugma, again, and this is with the same need to have a good psychiatrist. Finding a good psychiatrist is a really hard thing. There used to be a mythological creature of like the psychoanalyst psychiatrist. Still exists in like the NYU postdoctorate program, which is like, Adam Phillips level. But generally speaking, psychiatrists are as hard to come by as a good medicinal guide, maybe. One who will understand what the condition is. But what a medicine does is it doesn't take a person. The difference between what we might call an SSRI versus a mind-altering substance is that an SSRI is slowly but surely leveling the person's mind out to the point that they can begin to function at the even playing field. An SSRI, if it's working well, it stabilizes the anxiety symptoms, it stabilizes whatever the symptoms are, and it brings me back to a place of functionality where now I could imagine the good life. Because before I started off at a -5. So when other people are functioning in a space where, okay, the good life is a 5, that's not so far. I'm functioning with a handicap that makes it feel doubly impossible. How am I supposed to get from a -5 to a 5? And if I drink 10 shots of mashke at a fambrengen, which is ultimately not so different than the question about any other substance we're talking about, and the Lubavitch Rebbe understood this well. He didn't want people drinking at fambrengens. That was the takana. But if I go from -5 to 5 immediately, I would be crazy not to continue trying to go down that path because I've tasted all I wanted. The danger is that if I go from -5 to 5 in a derech of dilug, of skipping the process, then when I fall back down, it's going to hit with a thud, and I'm also maybe even going to descend deeper down than I began. And so there is a differentiation between a mind-altering substance, whether it's referred to as a medicine or whether it's referred to as anything, and irrespective of the positive benefits. And there's a difference between that and a stabilizing medication that is not mind-altering, that is not habit-forming, and that doesn't provide a dopamine burst that is not accessible in real life. But it slowly but surely does the work over time to make human volitionality and free choice a possibility again.
I love that you're bringing the perspective of addiction to this conversation. I think ketamine has the highest risk profile in terms of addictive potential. It does involve the opiate system. There is more of a pain relief. In general, with the classic psychedelics, they have not been shown to be physiologically addictive. So
Sure.
It's more of a complex, or are you on a path toward more independence versus more dependence, in the way that perhaps even a therapeutic relationship, right? When somebody comes to therapy, is this relationship empowering this individual to function well on their own? Or do they need the therapist more and more and more over time? That tells you a lot about the effectiveness of the therapy, right?
Sure.
So I just want to agree or just clarify that SSRIs, you need to have them in your system at all times for them to work, right? And most psychiatric medications, if we're going to oversimplify, are either activating or sedating to some degree or another. So sedation can be stabilizing, and some of them are in other ways, in more nuanced ways, it can help people contain affect, right? Can take the edge off of intense affect. So that can help people be more functional, like you're saying. Whereas a mind-altering experience will take you far out of the range of functioning for a temporary period of time in the hopes that you return more fully alive and more fully present, right? That's the ideal scenario, right? But
Right.
how you get there can be complex and is not risk-free.
Yes. And the only thing before you answer, I just wanted to add, and the only distinction I would make, Divi, is that addiction, and especially I'm rooted in kind of a 12-step theory.
Mm-hmm.
I believe in the theory of 12-step. Whether the practice of 12-step is a fundamental necessity is still much of a question. But again, 12-step theory is rooted in Jungian psychoanalysis, which in my mind brings us back to a purified form of Freud, which is, in my mind, I know I'm a yotzim and a klal in this, but I believe that there's a lot more to gain from Freudian analysis than there is to gain from Jungian kind of mythology. But suffice it to say that addiction at its core is not so much about the physiological, medical state of needing a substance to continue. In this sense, the question of the addictive nature of THC is of an important nature also, because while THC doesn't exhibit the same physiological tolerance and dependency that other mind-altering substances like opiates or benzos or alcohol might provide, one can argue, and I believe that this is vividly clear, that the mental dependency and the psychological dependency that emerges in a relationship with a substance like that is as severe, if not more severe, than the physiological dependency. The detox from opiates is a medical process. I believe that sooner or later they're going to streamline this with urgent cares, where that's not even going to be a part of the question anymore of kind of the recovery process. But I certainly agree with your point to the sense and the distinction between the mind-altering chemicals and the likelihood that it will not lead to a cross addiction. I certainly
and if the standard medications contain in some way these open, right, in a very oversimplified sense, these open, right?
Sure.
Which leaves you wondering, right? Are you ready to open? Why do you want to open? And it leads you into a line of inquiry that brings you to hopefully intentionality. Also,
Right.
some of the psychiatric medications that are prescribed can be highly addictive. Benzodiazepines is a prime example, right?
Absolutely.
And there are many practitioners who have told me it's not addictive at all. It's fine. You can take it. And I've had many decades of experience with the SSRIs and with other antidepressants and Valium, all these things, taking people to their psychiatrists, watching what happens. And often a therapist only sees the patient that comes and continues to come. I know it's not the case with all therapists, but many of them. What I got to see is the people who I think are most of them, who go, yeah, they take their prescription and then they get off of it, and then they take it and then they get off of it. And sometimes because they missed it, they'll take more, which often leads to suicidal ideation, maybe even suicide, which happened with two of my friends. And another thing that will occur, a common pattern, they're taking it, they feel great now, I'm fine, I don't need it anymore. Then after a while, they're back in the dumps, I need it again. But they need a higher dose than before.
Mm-hmm.
They're taking it, now it was 20, now it's 40 milligrams. And then eventually it's not helping anymore. Now it's supposed to go along with some CBT. There's supposed to be therapy. Most of the people I know, it's been prescribed by their MD, their family doctor. And even when it comes to a psychologist, like a psychiatrist, they just write the prescription, there's no CBT. I confronted a psychiatrist with, why are you not prescribing the CBT? Why there's no therapy involved? He said, people don't want to do the work. They just want to have the pill. They're not going to do the work anyways. They want the pill, I'll prescribe it for them.
Mm-hmm.
But this is happening again and again. I read a recent study from the College of London, a meta-study of SSRIs. I can't remember her name, but she's a prominent researcher. And her conclusion was that she said, in the vast majority of cases, it's only acting as a placebo. A blank statement. Well, it was a huge meta-study and very well publicized one. Mm-hmm. We were given really a bag of goods by the pharmaceutical companies. They talk about this. There's a chemical imbalance, which everybody knows is a lot of nonsense. And then they told them, well, they're serotonin reuptake inhibitors. They're not. We now know that they're not. They weren't doing that at all. What are they doing? And now I expect that Big Pharma is going to say, oh, that wasn't working, but we've got something else that does work. And here's how it goes. And again, it will be abused by family physicians and everybody else. Mm-hmm. The one thing that we know does work, and we have a lot of time to have known that it was work, and it's built in to human side of the human physiology, is community and friendships. There's nothing more healing, nothing more healthy than community and friendships. So the long-term Harvard study showed that very, very well. I have a good friend from Toronto, Doc Steiner, a psychologist with a trauma clinic. I asked him, I was talking about a case of depression. If a person has a clinic to go to, a good therapist, or a good friend, and a choice between one or the other, which one is going to work better? He said, hands down, a good friend. Nothing better than a good friend. We're not talking about extreme cases, in which case, I don't even know how much the therapist accomplishes if you can't put him into a clinic full time. But in long term, how can we argue? What we most need in society are good friends. One more thing, Divi, you're talking about going and getting recommendations from people who've been there and so on. Yes, in an ideal society, a person could do the research and make a fair judgment. Okay, this person, I've got evidence that this person works and so on, but that's not the way it happens. People go, first of all, go on and see the Google ratings, which are completely skewed, everybody knows. Secondly, in wherever you're living, the voices that get heard are not the sensible voices. They're the ones who scream the loudest and get you all excited and want you to go. And then there's all the commercial advertising because there are people who have vested interests. So it is very, very difficult, if not nigh impossible, for a person to make an objective decision in such a matter of that. And especially when you're talking about a person who is suffering. How is that person going to make the right decision? I'll tell you, there's only one way. And it all comes back to the same thing. They have good friends and a healthy community. Mm-hmm. So where we should be investing first and foremost is in those things.
Mm-hmm. To add to that, one of the letters from the Rebbe that I was looking at that a friend shared was talking about someone in distress. And the Rebbe was encouraging that you can either help this son directly, or you can lift him up by helping the other members of the family, because the family is a living organism. So if a person is not equipped to set out on their own healing path, let the people in their family start their own healing path. A healing path does not come easy, by the way. It's hard, but worthwhile. So while there are no easy answers, if a person actually wants to heal, it's not going to be through something that is advertised to them and handed to them on a Google advertisement. Like, that's very unlikely to be a true source of healing. It's going to be through things that are authentic, actually making connections with the right individuals. That can be a process, that can take time, but we're human beings, we're social creatures, we're capable of that. And if the person we're concerned about is not capable, then maybe we can do that for ourselves and allow that to have ripple effects on our family or community system.
I'll say just want to add one other thing, is that what often gets in the way with helping another person is that we feel, I have to heal this person. It becomes an all or nothing. And as soon as you let go of that, say, and instead you say, there's got to be something I can do just to make the next few moments of his life a little better.
Yeah.
Anything. At least I did something. Then you're on a path to really helping the person. And often it's like you said, by myself improving myself, if I'm part of this person's family, Emilio, so on, that's going to help him as well. Mm-hmm. But if we all are out for each other and care about each other, it's going to make everything easy for everybody.
Just to interject for a second, just because it's 5:30 here, so I'm going to head to sleep. It was a tremendous pleasure to be part of this discussion. And Be'ezras Hashem, it should only be healing and hopeful for everybody. And I don't mean to kind of bow out, but Be'ezras Hashem, I hope it continues as much as it needs to, and that we should be zocheh to do things healthily, calmly, and with patience. Be'ezras Hashem.
Amen. Thank you for being here.
Okay. We're getting pretty close to 10:30, which is when we have to wrap things up. I know I still have a bunch of questions. I know we have a lot of great questions here. I don't know, maybe we'll see if we can arrange some sort of a follow-up or a second episode. One more thing that I think maybe we could address briefly in a minute or two. Divi, Tzvi, Rabbi Ofer, anybody who has sort of something, I guess, if there's something brief and clear that you could sort of, give to address this. I know there's Anna Lemke is a psychiatrist which is a professor at Stanford, and she published relatively recently a book called Dopamine Nation. And sort of a big part of, that's the thesis of her book, or the idea that she's communicates, is that, life involves pain. And very often, let's call it, pain/discomfort, because ultimately discomfort is, let's say, just a lower grade of that which we would call pain when it escalates. And that life is going to involve discomfort at varying levels all the time. And it's it's very easy to get caught up in the running from discomfort towards the relief of dopamine. And today we have access to so many things that can just give us dopamine on demand. And we get caught up in, even if it's not in a substance, in addictive behavioral patterns with whatever it is. And, you know, she makes this suggestion that we should make an effort to get better at leaning into the pain and accepting the fact that, you know, it's a part of life and it's okay. And if instead of running away from it and getting caught up in this perpetual pursuit of dopamine, which generally slides downhill very quickly, by leaning into the pain, we can actually end up addressing it, becoming comfortable with it, which is one of the most effective ways of, you know, managing that. And I wonder if you have any insight into, obviously, you know, there's a time and a place when that's the right thing, and there's a time and a place when, you know, that's not going to be effective and it's too much. And, you know, if there's any insight into, you know, when and where is it a time and a place when a person maybe should say, you know what, instead of running and looking for some sort of medicine or therapy, I'm just going to lean into the fact that I'm a human being and part of this experience is going to involve pain and discomfort, and that's okay. And when and where is it a time and place to say, okay, no, I need to actually pursue some sort of therapeutic, you know, relief.
Yeah, so I think the purpose of medicine and therapy is to empower people to be fully alive, to experience the full range of human experience. What can happen if we're thinking about from a trauma lens is people can actually not feel their pain anymore. They're so shut down, or they can be in a perpetual state of fight, flight, or freeze. So their nervous system is wired. They can't physiologically relax into the moment. And that's where medicine, therapy, and other healing modalities come into play. Absolutely, to allow people to lean into the moment and live more fully and be more present and be able to enjoy even, but at least experience with acceptance the full range of their life, which is a really broad spectrum of experiences.
So Divi, you're saying that really what a therapist does is allow you to face your pain. The Baal Shem Tov said that you have to embrace pain, because when you run from pain, you're running from the body, which is pain, and you're making a period between Shem Havaya and Shem Elokim. So really the answer to Yisroel's question is it's all one thing. Mm-hmm. Embracing pain is feeling the pain. You're aware of the pain, and you allow the pain to do its healing. All the pain is the body and the brain, like Joey said, is part of your body. The body healing itself. It's screaming, it's saying, I need to heal myself, but you're ignoring me. You listen to that pain, you say, that's beautiful. I have a body. It wants to heal itself. Good. Now my neshama, my body work together, and it can heal myself. It can heal itself. Mm-hmm. And the body and the neshama together will take you to where you need to go. So instead of running from it, don't just fall into it. Embrace it, be aware of it, and let it guide you.
I love that. Khalil Gibran has a poem on pain, and he says, pain is the inner physician. And at the same time, we're here to alleviate suffering and to work together. I just want to turn this back to the audience who's been so patiently participating in a topic that we all care so much about, to remember how we walk this path humbly and with kindness to each other. And we're here to support each other in keeping open minds and open hearts to all of the possibilities for healing, and to really find the balance of moving forward with momentum, but really also heeding the wisdom of our heritage and our elders, and taking caution to make decisions with good discernment and with optimism.
Amen. We should have some good forbrangers.
Yes, amen. I want to just take this opportunity to again thank Neshamos for putting together this incredible panel and doing all the tremendous work behind the scenes to bring this together and make it happen, and to thank all the panelists. And as Divi said, to thank all of you, the audience, the participants came to, to hear and to be a part of this. And I'm gonna just echo that, but Be'ezus Hashem, we should all find the courage to, like Divi put it, to live fully and embrace everything that involves, and to take the actions that are necessary, and to and through that, through courage and embracing everything, all the different things that life has to offer, and pursuing purpose and meaning and community and connection, and the various therapeutic approaches that are available. May it be Hashem's will that we all of us collectively, those of us who are here and those of us who are not participating, should be able to live full lives and to feel that profound fulfillment. And we should be able to, and to experience, very simply put, to have good quality of life, and to do that ultimately in Yerushalayim HaKodesh with Mashiach.
Amen.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again. Thank you, everybody.